My name is Nora, 33 years old, and I am the CEO of a private healthcare insurance brokerage. I had just driven 24 hours straight to Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, exhausted but excited to meet my newborn nephew. But as I reached the door of the VIP maternity suite holding a custom knitted gift basket, my older brother Bradley stepped into the hallway and blocked my path. "What are you doing here?" He snapped, his voice dripping with disgust. "Jasmine does not want you around. Your bitter single woman energy is going to ruin our son's first day. This is for family only." I did not scream or cry. I simply placed the basket on the floor, turned around, and walked away. I let him think he had won. But he had no idea that 3 days later, a phone call from the hospital billing department regarding a $30,000 invoice would give me the power to dismantle his entire fake life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been treated like a second-class citizen by the very people who claim to be your family. Trust me, you will want to hear how I served them the ultimate reality check. Growing up in a pristine suburban neighborhood in New Jersey, our household revolved entirely around Bradley. My parents, Richard and Susan, treated him like a prince who could do no wrong, while I was merely the backup plan. They drained my college fund to pay off his credit card debt when we were in our 20s, claiming family always helps family. While he bounced from one failed sales job to another, I poured every ounce of my energy into my career. By 30, I had built a highly successful healthcare insurance brokerage from the ground up. I dealt with multi-million-dollar policies and complex financial negotiations daily. Yet to my family, my only value was my bank account. Things only escalated when Bradley married Jasmine. Jasmine is a stunning, highly educated African-American woman, but she is utterly obsessed with appearances. She curates a flawless luxury lifestyle on social media, demanding the best of everything. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, and now, a VIP maternity suite. Bradley, desperate to keep up the facade of a wealthy provider, constantly relied on my parents and me to silently fund his delusions. Just a few months ago, I had firmly refused to lend them $50,000 to cover their overdue homeowner association fees. Ever since that day, Jasmine had declared me toxic, and my parents had begged me to apologize for being selfish. Despite the tension when my mother texted that Jasmine had gone into labor, a sense of familial obligation washed over me. I was in the middle of a major corporate conference in Chicago. Flights were grounded due to a massive storm system, so I rented a car and drove 24 straight hours. I drank endless cups of black coffee, gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and pushed through the sheer exhaustion because I genuinely wanted to be there for my nephew. I bought a beautiful, customized gift basket filled with organic baby clothes, a pure cashmere blanket, and a soft, plush bear. When I finally pulled into the parking garage at Mount Sinai Hospital, my body was aching and my eyes were burning from lack of sleep, but my heart fluttered with anticipation. I rode the elevator up to the exclusive VIP maternity floor. The walls were lined with expensive artwork, and the air smelled faintly of lavender instead of clinical bleach. I spotted the room number my mother had texted me. I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway holding the heavy basket in both arms. Just as I reached for the handle, the door swung open. Bradley stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him. He was wearing a brand new designer polo shirt, looking fresh and perfectly groomed. He looked me up and down, his eyes locking onto my wrinkled travel clothes and tired face. He did not say hello. He did not say thank you for coming. He physically blocked the doorway, crossing his arms over his chest. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone low and hostile. I blinked momentarily, stunned by the pure venom in his voice. "I drove all night," I said quietly, shifting the heavy basket. "I came to see my nephew." Bradley scoffed, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "Jasmine does not want you around," he told me. "Your bitter single woman energy is going to ruin our son's first day. We are taking photos for her Instagram, and we cannot have you bringing down the mood." This room is for family only. Go back home, Nora. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. The sheer audacity of his words echoed in my ears. After everything I had done, after all the financial bailouts and the sacrifices, I was still just the unwanted sister. I looked into his arrogant eyes and realized there was no love there. There never had been. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or beg to go inside. I slowly lowered the customized gift basket to the hospital floor, right at his expensive leather shoes. I turned around and walked back down the long, quiet corridor. I could hear him laughing softly behind me, thinking he had finally put me in my place. He thought he had all the power, but he was about to learn a very expensive lesson. I pressed the elevator button and descended back to the hospital parking garage. The cold concrete walls echoed with my slow footsteps. The adrenaline that had kept me awake for the past 24 hours was rapidly draining from my body, replaced by a hollow, heavy exhaustion. Before I even reached my rental car, my phone began vibrating incessantly in the pocket of my coat. Buzz after buzz, a relentless assault. I pulled it out, half expecting a frantic apology from my mother, perhaps telling me that Bradley had acted out of turn and that I should come back upstairs. I swiped the screen to unlock it. There was no apology. Instead, there was a wall of text messages from my mother, Susan. I stood there in the dim, fluorescent light of the garage and read her words. "Why did you upset Jasmine? You know she needs to stay perfectly calm. Bradley just texted me saying you caused a scene in the hallway and stressed her out. How could you be so selfish on the most important day of their lives? You know she has had high blood pressure ever since you selfishly refused to lend Bradley $50,000 for their HOA fees. Just go back to your hotel and apologize to them later." I stared at the glowing screen. A scene. Bradley had claimed I caused a scene. I had barely spoken 2 sentences, left a gift, and walked away. Yet in the twisted narrative of my family, I was already the villain. But what truly made my blood run cold was the mention of the $50,000. My mother could not even let me process the rejection at the hospital door without throwing my one act of financial boundary setting back in my face. Let me clarify what she meant by those HOA fees. 6 months ago, Bradley and Jasmine bought a massive $1.5 million house in an exclusive gated community. They wanted the status, the address, and the envy of their friends. What they did not want, or rather what they could not afford, were the exorbitant homeowners association fees and the property taxes that came with it. When they fell behind, they did not downsize. They did not cut back on their luxury vacations or Jasmine's designer shopping sprees. Instead, Bradley called me and demanded a $50,000 loan. He did not ask. He demanded it, citing that my insurance brokerage was having a record-breaking quarter, so I could easily spare the cash. When I told him absolutely not, that I was not a bank to fund his irresponsible lifestyle, Jasmine threw a massive fit. She claimed the stress of my selfishness was endangering her pregnancy. My parents immediately took their side, accusing me of hoarding wealth while my brother suffered. Standing in the parking garage, reading my mother's text, the reality of my role in this family became painfully clear. I was never a daughter. I was never a sister. I was an ATM. When the ATM dispensed cash, I was tolerated. When the ATM declined a transaction, I was toxic, bitter, and selfish. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. "Well, are you going to text Bradley and apologize? Family is all we have, Nora. Do not ruin this." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Family is all we have. That phrase was their favorite weapon. They used the word family as a loaded shield to force my compliance. It was a one-way street. Family meant I had to sacrifice my time, my money, and my dignity to keep Bradley comfortable. But family never meant protecting me. Family never meant defending me when my brother treated me like dirt in a hospital hallway. They expected me to swallow my pride and crawl back, begging for their forgiveness just for existing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A part of me, the deeply ingrained, obedient daughter part, wanted to draft a carefully worded reply to keep the peace. But the woman I had become, the CEO who negotiated with corporate sharks every single day, took over. I deleted the draft. I did not owe them an apology. I did not owe them my peace of mind. And I certainly did not owe them a single dime ever again. I typed back a simple, concise response. I am going back to my hotel. I will not be apologizing for anything. Enjoy your grandson. I hit send and immediately put my phone on airplane mode. The silence that followed was deafening but incredibly liberating. I finally reached my rental car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. I closed the door, sealing myself off from the world outside. I rested my forehead against the cold leather of the steering wheel. The physical ache of the long drive was still there, but mentally a switch had been flipped. I was done trying to buy their love. I started the engine and drove out of the parking garage, completely unaware that in just 3 days my phone would ring again, and this time the hospital would be calling me with a revelation that would shatter Bradley's perfect world into a million pieces. I merged onto the busy Manhattan streets, the glow of the city lights blurring against the rain-slicked windshield. The heavy silence in the rental car was suddenly broken by the sharp ring of my Bluetooth system. It was Megan, my executive assistant. I tapped the screen on the dashboard to answer. Nora. I know you are technically on family leave. Megan began, her voice crisp and professional, but the chief financial officer of Apex Dynamics just pushed back on their annual premium hike. They are threatening to take their 2,000 employee health insurance account to a competitor. Let them threaten, I said smoothly, my corporate instincts instantly overriding my emotional exhaustion. Apex has a high-risk claims history and a terrible employee retention rate. No other brokerage is going to underwrite them for less than what we quoted. Tell their financial officer that if he walks, he loses the custom wellness tier we negotiated with the carriers. He has exactly 24 hours to sign the renewal contract. Understood, Megan said, sounding instantly relieved. You always know exactly how to call their bluff. By the way, the board wants to officially congratulate you on closing the Harrison Group deal. That is an $8 million policy. Not bad for a Tuesday. How is the new nephew? The innocent question felt like a physical blow to my chest. I did not get to see him, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. Bradley decided it was a closed event. What? Megan gasped, dropping her professional tone. After you drove 24 hours straight through a storm, Nora, that is absolutely insane. It is what it is, I said, staring at the red taillights of the cab in front of me. Cancel the rest of my schedule for the week. I am heading back to the hotel to sleep, and then I am flying back to the West Coast. I ended the call and let the harsh reality of the contrast wash over me. In my professional life, I was a shark. I founded my healthcare insurance brokerage at 27, building it from a cramped rented desk into a massive firm that handled multi-million-dollar portfolios. Chief executive officers of major corporations respected my boundaries. Billion-dollar insurance carriers returned my calls within minutes. I commanded rooms full of men twice my age and dictated terms that shaped the healthcare coverage of thousands of people. I was a powerhouse, yet the moment I stepped into the orbit of my own family, I was reduced to absolute nothingness. To my parents, I was just Bradley's awkward, unmarried younger sister. They saw my intense work ethic as a tragic character flaw, a sad overcompensation for not having a husband or children. Jasmine routinely mocked my career to her friends, assuming I was just some glorified data entry clerk pushing paper in a cubicle. They had no concept of what it meant to hold the kind of financial power I yielded every single day. Bradley, on the other hand, was a regional sales manager for a struggling logistics company. His base salary barely covered the mortgage on his massive house, let alone the luxury cars, the country club memberships, and Jasmine's endless designer wardrobe. He lived his entire life on a razor-thin edge of credit, constantly juggling massive debts and dodging creditors, all while projecting the flawless image of a titan of industry. And my parents ate it up. They worshipped his hollow success while dismissing my tangible self-made empire. The irony was incredibly bitter. I was the absolute expert in risk management. My entire career was built on assessing liabilities, mitigating financial losses, and spotting fraudulent claims from a mile away. I knew exactly how to read the fine print that other people ignored. I understood the complex web of billing codes, hospital premiums, and insurance deductibles better than anyone else in the state. It was a highly specialized skill set that had made me incredibly wealthy, but to my family, my career was just boring administrative work. I finally pulled up to the valet stand at my luxury hotel, tossing the keys to the attendant. As I rode the elevator up to my penthouse suite, I made a silent, ironclad vow. I was done compartmentalizing my life. I was done being the powerful executive in the boardroom and the submissive punching bag at the family dinner table. If they wanted to treat me like an unwanted outsider, I would gladly play the part. I stripped off my wrinkled travel clothes, ordered a ridiculous amount of expensive room service, and fell into the massive king-sized bed. I slept for 14 hours straight, a deep, dreamless sleep of the truly detached. When I woke up the next morning, my mind was crystal clear. I booked a first-class ticket home, feeling lighter than I had in years. The toxic cord had finally been cut. I thought I had walked away cleanly. I thought the worst of the family drama was officially over. I had absolutely no idea that Bradley's desperate obsession with status had already set a ticking time bomb, and that my professional expertise was the only thing about to expose his massive web of lies. 3 days later, I was sitting in the quiet luxury of the first-class departure lounge at Newark Liberty International Airport. My flight back to the West Coast was scheduled to board in an hour. I was reviewing a commercial policy renewal on my tablet. For the first time in my life, I felt disconnected from the chaotic gravity of my family. I had not spoken to my parents or brother since the hospital. My phone had been blissfully silent. I was finally free. Or so I thought. My phone vibrated on the marble table. I saw an unfamiliar New York number. Normally, I let unknown numbers go to voicemail, but my professional instincts told me it might be a corporate client. I brought the phone to my ear. "Hello, this is Nora," I answered. "Good morning. My name is Cynthia, calling from the patient billing department at Mount Sinai Hospital. Am I speaking with the correct person?" My fingers froze. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Yes, this is Nora," I replied. "How can I help you? I am calling regarding the outstanding balance for the recent admission of your sister-in-law." "Jasmine," the representative said. "Jasmine and her newborn son were discharged early this morning from our VIP maternity wing. We were processing the final papers and running the insurance claims, but unfortunately we hit a significant billing issue." I sat back in my chair. I assumed Bradley threw a tantrum over some minor copay and gave them my number to harass me. "What kind of issue?" I asked. "The primary health insurance policy on file for the patient was denied." Cynthia explained. The carrier indicated that the policy was officially terminated 6 months ago due to non-payment of premiums. Because the insurance is invalid, the account has defaulted to a self-pay status. The total balance for the 5-day stay in the VIP maternity suite, the specialized consultations, and the premium catering comes out to exactly $30,300. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. $30,300. I repeated the number in my head, trying to process the sheer audacity of it. Bradley had canceled his family health insurance 6 months ago. My mind raced back to the brand new Tesla he had leased around the exact same time. He had literally gambled his wife's and his newborn son's health care to finance a luxury car to show off to the neighbors. But that was his problem, not mine. I took a deep breath. "I am very sorry to hear that, Cynthia," I said, maintaining my professional composure. "But I am not sure why you are calling me. You need to contact my brother Bradley. He is the patient's husband." "I understand that," Cynthia replied. "We have tried reaching him, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. We are calling you because you are listed as the primary financial guarantor on the admission documents. The world around me seemed to tilt on its axis. The low hum of the airport lounge faded into white noise. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What did you just say?" "You are the documented financial guarantor," Cynthia repeated patiently. "We have a signed financial responsibility agreement on file. It states that in the event of an insurance denial, you assume full financial liability for all medical charges incurred by the patient. We also have your social security number on file to verify your identity. So how would you like to arrange payment today? We accept all major credit cards, or we can set up a wire transfer." A hot, searing wave of pure fury washed over me. I had never signed any agreement. I had never given them my social security number. Bradley had not just been an arrogant jerk in the hospital hallway. He had actively committed identity theft and medical fraud to secure a luxury suite he could not afford. He had forged my signature and handed over my highly sensitive personal information, fully expecting me to just absorb the massive debt to avoid a family scandal. He thought he could trap me. He thought I would pay the $30,000 just to keep the peace, exactly like my parents always did. I did not scream. I did not panic. The scared little sister was completely gone, replaced by the ruthless corporate executive who destroyed fraudsters for a living. "Cynthia," I said, my voice as cold as ice, "do not process any payments. I need you to email me every single document associated with that admission file right now. Send it to my secure corporate email. Give me 48 hours. I will handle the payment personally." I hung up the phone and immediately opened my laptop right there in the bustling airport lounge. I connected to my secure corporate server, bypassing the public Wi-Fi to ensure absolute data privacy. Within 10 minutes, a heavily encrypted email from Cynthia arrived in my inbox. For an average person, a hospital billing file is a terrifying, confusing maze of medical jargon, complex numerical codes, and endless legal disclaimers. Most people just look at the total amount due and panic. But for me, this was my native language. I had spent over a decade analyzing, auditing, and dissecting these exact types of documents. I knew exactly how billing departments operated, how insurance claims were processed, and exactly where the financial traps were hidden. I downloaded the PDF file, took a slow sip of my water, and began scrolling through the massive admission packet. I completely bypassed the standard patient intake forms and the medical history questionnaires. I went straight for the financial disclosures and liability section. There it was, sitting plainly on the third page: the financial responsibility and guarantor agreement. I zoomed in on the document on my high-resolution screen. My full legal name was typed perfectly at the top of the form, along with my correct home address, my personal cell phone number, and my exact date of birth. But what made my blood boil, what truly pushed this from a family dispute into a criminal act, was the small box on the second page. My social security number was typed out in plain text. Bradley had memorized my social security number years ago when my parents relentlessly pressured me to co-sign the mortgage for his house. He had kept that highly sensitive information saved and ready for a moment exactly like this. He had essentially handed the hospital the master keys to my entire financial existence without a second thought. I scrolled down to the signature line at the bottom of the page. Someone had physically signed my name on the electronic pad. It was a pathetic, sloppy forgery. The loops on the letters were entirely wrong, but I immediately recognized the heavy, aggressive slant of the pen strokes. It was undeniably Bradley's handwriting. He had stood at the hospital admission desk, looked a billing registrar dead in the eye, and fraudulently signed a legally binding document. He legally claimed that I would unconditionally cover whatever luxury services his wife demanded during her stay, and Jasmine demanded a massive amount. I opened the itemized ledger attached to the main file, and my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. This was not a standard medically necessary labor and delivery bill. Bradley had specifically requested an elective upgrade to the hospital's premium platinum maternity package. The itemized charges were absolutely sickening to read. $8,000 a night for a corner maternity suite with panoramic views of the city skyline. $2,000 for a private gourmet chef who prepared custom organic meals. $700 for an elective postpartum massage therapist. $500 for an exclusive lactation consultant. $400 for premium floral arrangements delivered directly to the room. They had treated the medical facility like a five-star luxury resort. They rang up premium services while completely aware that their insurance had been terminated. They did this fully believing I would be legally trapped into footing the bill. Bradley assumed I would be too embarrassed by a hospital collection agency calling my corporate office to actually fight the charges. He thought I would just quietly write a check to protect my pristine credit score, preserve my professional reputation, and avoid another exhausting family drama. He banked entirely on my lifelong habit of remaining silent. But Bradley made one catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed my wealth and my previous compliance made me a soft target. He forgot that you do not build a highly successful insurance brokerage by letting arrogant men steal from you. I spent my days fighting fraudulent claims from massive corporations. Did he really think I would let my mediocre brother commit fraud against me and get away with it? What he had done was not just a sleazy family betrayal. It was malicious, premeditated identity theft. It was blatant medical fraud. In the eyes of the law, defrauding a healthcare facility using stolen personal identification is a severe felony offense. I downloaded every single page, saved backups to my encrypted cloud drive, and forwarded the entire file to my personal attorney. I closed my laptop with a sharp snap and placed it in my bag. My flight was finally boarding, but my mind was already meticulously plotting the exact sequence of his absolute destruction. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, I reclined my seat and purchased the in-flight Wi-Fi. I could not just sit there and watch a movie. My mind was moving a million miles a minute. I needed to understand the mechanics of Bradley's stupidity. I opened the denial letter Cynthia had included in the encrypted file. It was a standard rejection notice from a major national health carrier, but the specific reason code caught my eye. It did not say the policy was terminated for non-payment by the employer. It clearly stated terminated by employee election. That meant Bradley had deliberately opted out of his coverage. But why would a man with a pregnant wife voluntarily cancel his health insurance? I leaned back and thought about Bradley's employer. He worked as a regional sales manager for a mid-sized logistics company. By pure coincidence, my brokerage had actually bid on that exact company's corporate healthcare account 2 years ago. We did not win the contract, but I still had their entire benefits portfolio memorized. I knew exactly what they offered their employees. For a family of 3, their premium contribution required an employee payroll deduction of roughly $1,200 a month. That was a significant chunk of change missing from his paycheck. A sudden sickening suspicion washed over me. I opened a new tab on my browser and went straight to Jasmine's Instagram page. Her profile was public naturally. It was a meticulously curated shrine to fake wealth filled with designer bags, expensive brunches, and humble bragging captions. I scrolled past the endless stream of newborn photos, past the elaborate baby shower pictures, and kept going back. I scrolled back exactly 6 months. And there it was. A high-definition video of Jasmine screaming in delight in their driveway. Parked in front of their massive suburban house was a brand-new, gleaming white Tesla Model X SUV with a giant red bow on the hood. The caption read, "My amazing hubby surprised me with my dream mom car today. Feeling so incredibly blessed. God is good." I sat staring at the screen as the pieces slammed together with terrifying clarity. $1,200 a month. That was the exact average monthly lease payment for a premium Tesla Model X. Bradley had not just fallen on hard times, he had made a calculated, incredibly reckless choice. 6 months ago, Jasmine was heavily pregnant and constantly complaining about needing a luxury vehicle to fit in with her affluent circle of friends. Her friend group consisted of successful corporate lawyers, high-end real estate agents, and tech executives who actually earned their wealth. Jasmine was desperate to keep up. Bradley, utterly terrified of his wife's disapproval and entirely addicted to his own fake image, had to find the money somewhere. But his credit cards were maxed out. They were already drowning in mortgage debt and unpaid homeowners association fees. He had no cash left. So he walked into his human resources department, signed a waiver explicitly declining all employer-sponsored health coverage for his family, and pocketed that extra $1,200 a month from his paycheck. He took the money that was supposed to guarantee his wife and unborn child safe medical care, and he walked straight into a luxury car dealership. He traded their health and safety for a depreciating metal box, just so Jasmine could post a bragging video on social media. And the most pathetic part, I was absolutely certain Jasmine had no idea. She was vain and demanding, yes, but she was not completely insane. No pregnant woman would ever consent to canceling her health insurance right before giving birth just to drive a fancy car. Bradley had lied to her. He let her waltz into a premium hospital, demand a VIP maternity suite, and order custom organic meals, all while knowing their insurance card was a useless piece of plastic. He knew the bill would be astronomical. That was exactly why he had my social security number locked and loaded. He planned to make me the ultimate scapegoat for his grand financial illusion. He knew that if the hospital eventually came after me, my parents would step in and relentlessly pressure me to pay it. They would use their favorite weapon, family loyalty, to force me into submission. They would tell me that Bradley was just a stressed father who made a mistake, and that with my massive corporate salary, $30,000 was nothing to me. He had orchestrated this entire scenario, banking on my lifelong habit of suffering in silence to keep the peace. A cold, dangerous calm settled over me. He really thought I was just a stupid, obedient ATM. He thought my career in the insurance industry was just boring paperwork. He had no idea that he had just handed a masterclass fraud investigator a perfectly documented paper trail of his own destruction. I closed the browser and rested my head against the window, watching the clouds pass by far below. The rage had completely evaporated, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. I was not just going to refuse to pay the hospital. I was not just going to report the identity theft to the police in a quiet, private manner. I was going to systematically dismantle the fake reality he had built. I was going to wait for the perfect moment, the perfect audience, and then I was going to lay every single one of his secrets out in the open. I was going to make sure that the affluent social circle he sacrificed his own family to impress would be the exact same people to watch him fall. I landed back on the West Coast with a singular, unbreakable focus. I spent the next 2 days working from my penthouse office, securing the hospital billing documents, and finalizing some very specific legal paperwork with my attorney. The trap was fully set. I was just waiting for Bradley to give me the perfect opportunity to spring it. I did not have to wait long. On Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was a group text message from Jasmine. I opened it and let out a dry, humorless laugh. It was a digital invitation for an extravagant sip and see party to formally introduce the baby to their social circle. The invitation was a masterpiece of suburban pretension. It featured professional calligraphy, a strict cocktail casual dress code, and heavily emphasized that the event would be hosted at their custom-built estate. Jasmine had included over 50 people on the thread, mostly her affluent friends, local influencers, and of course my parents. I stared at the screen, marveling at the sheer audacity. They were throwing a lavish, fully catered party in a $1.5 million house, while simultaneously trying to stick me with a $30,000 hospital bill. A normal person would have declined the invitation, or simply ignored it. But I was not going to miss this for the world. Jasmine had unknowingly assembled the exact audience I needed. She wanted to show off her perfect life to her wealthy friends. I was going to give her a show they would never forget. Before I could even type a reply, an incoming call took over my screen. It was my father, Richard. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Dad," I said. "Did you see the invitation?" he asked, skipping any form of a greeting. "I just got it," I replied neutrally. "Good," my father said, his voice taking on that familiar authoritative tone he only ever used to command me. "Listen to me, Nora. You are going to fly back here this weekend, and you are going to attend this party. You embarrassed your brother at the hospital. You stressed Jasmine out when she was in a very fragile state. You need to make this right." I leaned back in my leather office chair, staring at the panoramic view of the city. "I embarrassed him," I asked quietly. "Do not start with the attitude," my father snapped. "Family is family. Bradley is under a lot of pressure providing for his new son. You make more money in a month than he makes in a year. It is time you stepped up and acted like a supportive sister for once. I expect you to be there. And I expect you to bring a $10,000 check for your nephew's college fund." I actually smiled at that. A $10,000 check. It was so incredibly predictable. They did not want my presence at the party. They wanted my wallet. They wanted me to pay a massive admission fee just to be allowed back into their toxic inner circle. My father was trying to bully me into funding Bradley's fake lifestyle, completely unaware that his golden boy had already tried to steal 3 times that amount from me through identity theft. "Dad, I am not writing a $10,000 check to apologize for being turned away at a hospital door," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and devoid of emotion. My father let out a heavy sigh of disappointment. "Nora, why do you always have to be so difficult? Bradley needs this. Jasmine needs this. If you do not bring that check, do not bother showing up at all. You will be completely cutting yourself off from this family. Is your money really more important to you than your own blood?" The manipulation was textbook. For 33 years, that exact tone of voice had made me cave. It had made me write checks, co-sign loans, and shrink myself down to keep the peace. But the spell was finally broken. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical resolve. "You are right, Dad," I said softly. "Family is important. I will be there on Saturday." "Good," my father grunted, sounding relieved that his intimidation tactics had worked once again. "Make sure the check is written out to Bradley, not a trust fund. He needs to manage the money." I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. "I will be sure to bring an envelope," I told him. "Do not worry, Dad. I am bringing exactly what Bradley deserves." I ended the call before he could say another word. I walked back to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a thick ivory envelope. I did not put a $10,000 check inside. Instead, I carefully folded the forged hospital admission form, the $30,000 invoice, and one more highly confidential legal document, slipping them all inside. The stage was set. That third document I slid into the ivory envelope was far more destructive than any medical bill. It was a legally binding notice of default and foreclosure. To understand why I had it, you have to go back 3 years. When Bradley and Jasmine decided they absolutely needed a $1.5 million estate in an exclusive gated community, there was a massive problem. Bradley had abysmal credit. No reputable bank was going to approve a loan of that size on his mediocre sales manager salary. Naturally, my parents panicked. They could not bear the thought of their golden boy suffering the humiliation of living in a standard middle-class home. So they came to me. They begged, pleaded, and used every ounce of emotional blackmail they possessed. They promised Bradley would make every single payment on time. Exhausted by their relentless guilt trips, I finally agreed to co-sign the mortgage. But I was not entirely foolish. I insisted that my name be officially placed on the property deed as a co-owner. Bradley threw a massive tantrum about it, claiming I was trying to control his life, but he eventually signed the papers because he had absolutely no other way to get the house. For the first 2 years, he managed to scrape by. The payments were always late, but they were made. But exactly 6 months ago, right around the time Jasmine posted that glowing video of her brand new Tesla Model X, the mortgage payments completely stopped. The bank immediately sent default notices to my primary address. Bradley had intentionally defaulted on his massive mortgage to fund a luxury car lease, fully assuming I would quietly cover the missing house payments to protect my own pristine credit score. He thought he had trapped me in a financial corner. He was wrong. Instead of acting like the compliant family ATM, I treated the situation like a toxic corporate asset. I reached out to Vanguard Debt Solutions, a highly aggressive commercial collection agency that specialized in acquiring distressed real estate assets. Since I legally owned 50% of the property equity and the primary borrower was in severe default, I negotiated a quiet buyout. I sold my entire equity share directly to Vanguard for pennies on the dollar, legally severing my name from the toxic loan and transferring my ownership rights to a team of ruthless corporate liquidators. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct extension for my contact at Vanguard. A man with a sharp, no-nonsense voice answered on the second ring. "This is David," he said. "David, it is Nora," I replied, looking down at the elegant ivory envelope on my desk. "I am just calling to verify the status of the suburban property we finalized last month. Are we still on schedule?" David typed rapidly on his keyboard. "Yes, Nora. The grace period for the delinquent borrower officially expired 48 hours ago. Vanguard is now the legal majority stakeholder of the property. We have already initiated the formal foreclosure process. A certified eviction notice is scheduled to be served by local law enforcement next Monday morning. The occupants will have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before we seize the physical asset." "Perfect," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "I will actually be seeing the current occupants this Saturday at a social event. I plan to give them a verbal courtesy notice regarding the impending foreclosure. I just wanted to make sure all the legal paperwork is completely locked in on your end." "Everything is locked and filed with the county clerk," David confirmed. "The borrower has zero legal recourse at this point. They do not own that house anymore. Vanguard does." I thanked him and ended the call. The satisfaction I felt was completely intoxicating. Bradley had spent his entire adult life building a fragile house of cards financed by my money and propped up by my parents' blind enabling. He had treated me with absolute contempt, banning me from a hospital room while actively committing a federal crime to steal my identity. He invited me to a lavish party in a mansion he did not even own, expecting me to hand him a $10,000 check to apologize for his own cruelty. I carefully sealed the thick ivory envelope and placed it inside my designer handbag. The arsenal was fully assembled. I had the forged medical documents to expose his criminal fraud and the Vanguard foreclosure notice to destroy his fake wealth. I walked out of my penthouse office and headed straight toward the airport. Jasmine wanted a high society gathering to show off her perfect suburban life. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for and so much more. I pulled my car up to the massive iron gates of the exclusive suburban community on Saturday afternoon. The security guard checked my name against a digital list and waved me through. As I drove down the winding manicured streets toward Bradley and Jasmine's $1.5 million house, the sheer scale of their financial delusion was on full display. I parked a few houses down because their entire circular driveway was jammed with luxury vehicles. Right in the center, parked at an angle to ensure maximum visibility, was the gleaming white Tesla Model X, the very same car that was currently costing my nephew his health insurance. I walked up the paver stone pathway and pushed open the heavy oak front door. The noise of a packed high society gathering instantly washed over me. This was not a casual family get-together. They had hired a professional waitstaff. Servers in crisp white shirts and black vests were circulating through the massive open-concept living room, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes and expensive hors d'oeuvres. A live acoustic guitarist was playing softly in the corner. Floor-to-ceiling custom floral arrangements, easily costing several $1,000s, decorated every single table. I stood in the foyer for a moment, doing a quick mental calculation of the event. Between the catering, the staff, and the decor, they had easily spent $5,000 or $6,000 on this party alone, all while their house was actively in foreclosure, and a hospital billing department was hunting down a $30,000 invoice. I handed my coat to a hired attendant and stepped fully into the main living space. It did not take long to spot Jasmine. She was standing near the massive marble kitchen island holding court with a large group of her affluent friends. Jasmine was wearing a custom silk designer dress that draped perfectly over her postpartum figure. She looked stunning, radiant, and entirely fake. The women surrounding her were exactly the type of people she spent her entire life trying to impress. They were highly successful African American women. I recognized a prominent corporate attorney from a downtown firm, a top-tier luxury real estate broker, and a few executives from the tech sector. These women had actually earned their wealth through grueling education and years of hard work. Jasmine, however, was desperately mimicking their success, using stolen funds and forged documents. I slowly walked closer, blending in with the crowd near the kitchen, close enough to hear exactly what she was bragging about. It was honestly just magical, Jasmine was saying, her voice pitched loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. Bradley completely surprised me. He told the staff at Mount Sinai that only the absolute best was acceptable for his son. We had the platinum corner suite with the private chef. The view of the city was breathtaking. I told him he was spoiling me, but you know how Bradley is. He insists on providing top-tier luxury for his family. He always says a king treats his queen like royalty. The women around her nodded and smiled, raising their champagne glasses in polite agreement. The corporate attorney made a comment about how difficult it was to even secure a reservation for that specific VIP wing. Jasmine laughed a high-pitched, triumphant sound and casually waved her hand. Well, when you have the right connections and the right budget, they make it happen, Jasmine boasted. Bradley took care of the entire bill out of pocket. He did not even want to bother with the insurance paperwork. He just swiped his card and told them to keep the champagne coming. My stomach churned at the sheer audacity of the lie. Swiped his card. He had forged my social security number and committed a federal felony, and here she was spinning it into a romantic fairy tale of massive wealth. I took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of my designer handbag on my shoulder, and stepped directly into her line of sight. The shift in the room was almost instantaneous. Jasmine happened to glance away from her group and locked eyes with me. Her bright, performative smile vanished in a fraction of a second. The laughter died in her throat. Her affluent friends, noticing the sudden change in her demeanor, turned their heads to follow her gaze. The vibrant chatter in that specific corner of the room faded into an uncomfortable, heavy silence. I did not look away. I stood tall, projecting the same quiet, ruthless authority I used when walking into a hostile boardroom. I was wearing a sharply tailored, understated designer suit that cost more than the catering budget for this entire party, completely shattering the narrative that I was just some bitter, struggling sister. Jasmine let out a loud, theatrical sigh and dramatically rolled her eyes. She turned back to her friends, her voice dripping with venom. "Oh, look," Jasmine said, making absolutely sure I could hear every single word. The workaholic sister finally decided to grace us with her presence. I honestly did not think she would have the nerve to show her face here today. Let us hope she brought the apology check, otherwise this is going to be a very short visit. Her friends exchanged awkward, judgmental glances, clearly poisoned by whatever lies Jasmine had been feeding them about me. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. Jasmine crossed her arms and glared at me, waiting for me to shrink away or look embarrassed. But I did not flinch. I just offered her a cold, polite smile, my hand resting firmly against the thick ivory envelope hidden inside my bag. The lion's den was exactly where I wanted to be. Before the silence in the living room could stretch into something unbearable, I broke eye contact with Jasmine and offered a polite, close-lipped smile to the room at large. I adjusted my grip on my handbag and walked past the staring guests, heading straight toward the massive marble kitchen. I needed a glass of water, but more importantly, I knew my movement would force a reaction. I did not have to wait long. I had barely reached the granite island when a heavy hand clamped down on my upper arm. I turned to see my father, Richard, his face flushed red with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He quickly let go of my arm and glanced over his shoulder to make sure none of Jasmine's affluent friends had followed us into the kitchen. He stepped close, invading my personal space, his voice dropping to a harsh, demanding whisper. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed. "You just walked in there and completely ruined the mood. Jasmine was in the middle of a story. I told you to come here and be supportive, not stand there glaring at everyone like you own the place." "I did not glare at anyone, Dad," I replied evenly, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water from a crystal pitcher left on the island. "Jasmine is the one who greeted me by aggressively asking for an apology check in front of 50 strangers. If anyone is ruining the mood, it is the host." My father waved his hand dismissively, brushing past my entirely valid point. "She is just stressed from the pregnancy and the new baby. She wants everything to be perfect today. Now stop stalling. Did you bring the check or not?" He looked pointedly at my designer handbag, his eyes tracking the expensive leather. "Give it to me right now so I can go find Bradley and hand it to him directly. He can show it to Jasmine in private, she will calm down, and we can all move on from this ridiculous drama you caused at the hospital." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, letting the cold liquid ground me. "I am not giving you a check, Dad. There is no $10,000 apology in my bag for Bradley or Jasmine. I am not paying an extortion fee to attend a party in a house that I paused, catching myself before I revealed the foreclosure detail too early. "I am not paying them for the privilege of being insulted by a woman who married into my family." My father's face darkened instantly. The veins in his neck began to bulge against his tight shirt collar, a clear sign his temper was about to snap. He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing with pure, unfiltered contempt. "You are incredibly selfish, Nora. You always have been. You sit up in your fancy penthouse office, making high six figures playing the big corporate boss, and you cannot even spare $10,000 for your own newborn nephew's future. You know your brother is under immense financial pressure right now trying to provide for his family. That pressure is entirely self-inflicted." I shot back, keeping my voice low but razor sharp. "He leased a $100,000 luxury car he cannot afford. He lives in a $1.5 million house he cannot afford. He is buying organic catering and hiring live musicians when he does not have the cash. That is not my responsibility." My father slammed his open palm down on the granite countertop. It was a loud, startling crack that made a nearby hired server jump and quickly scurry out of the kitchen. He did not care. His anger had entirely blinded him to our surroundings. "This is exactly what you always do," my father snarled, pointing a thick finger directly at my chest. "You hold on to your money like it makes you superior to us. You have always been so greedy. We drained your college fund to pay off Bradley's credit card debts when you were 20, and you are still punishing us for it a decade later. You hold that over our heads every single chance you get because you are bitter that he has a family and you are alone." I stood completely frozen. The air in the kitchen seemed to vanish entirely. I stared at the man who had helped raise me, listening to the absolute madness spilling from his mouth. He had just admitted to stealing my tuition money I had worked multiple part-time jobs in high school to help save to bail out his adult son from a massive shopping addiction. And somehow, in his deeply warped mind, my lasting trauma over that massive betrayal made me the greedy one. He had completely rewritten history to make himself and Bradley the tragic victims of my financial boundaries. It was a profound, chilling moment of absolute clarity. For years, a tiny, foolish part of me had hoped that if I just became successful enough, if I just proved my worth through my career, they would eventually respect me. But looking into my father's furious, resentful eyes, I realized the undeniable truth. They would never change. They would never see me as a daughter. I was nothing but a resource to be mined, and they hated me simply because I had finally stopped producing gold on command. All the lingering guilt, all the residual familial obligation evaporated completely. It was replaced by a brilliant, blinding focus. "I am not punishing you, Dad," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or hesitation. I am just no longer participating in your delusions. I set my water glass down on the counter with a soft click. I reached into my bag and wrapped my fingers around the thick, ivory envelope. It was time to stop waiting in the kitchen. I turned my back on my father and walked straight back into the crowded, noisy living room. It was time to give Jasmine the audience she so desperately craved. I stepped out of the kitchen and back into the sprawling, sunlit living room. The acoustic guitarist was playing a smooth jazz melody, and the low hum of wealthy conversations filled the air. My father remained hidden in the kitchen behind me, likely too furious to show his face after his failed intimidation attempt. I walked deliberately toward the center of the room, my heels clicking softly against the imported hardwood floors. Jasmine was still holding court near the massive stone fireplace, her perfectly manicured hand wrapped around a crystal flute of imported champagne. When she saw me approaching, a wicked, triumphant glint sparked in her dark eyes. She thought my father had just successfully broken me down. She thought I was walking over to hand over my dignity and fund her lifestyle. Jasmine stepped away from her circle of affluent friends and moved to the very center of the room. She raised her glass high and tapped it sharply with her heavy diamond wedding ring. The sharp, clear ringing sound instantly cut through the chatter. The guitarist immediately stopped playing. 50 heads turned simultaneously toward the host. The room fell into an expectant, quiet hush. Jasmine smiled a brilliant, practiced expression that she had perfected for her social media followers, but her eyes remained cold and locked entirely on me. Thank you all so much for being here today. Jasmine began, her voice projecting effortlessly across the massive open concept room. Bradley and I are just so incredibly blessed to be surrounded by our amazing friends as we formally introduce our beautiful son to the world. It has been such a magical journey, building this perfect life together, creating a home filled with love in this beautiful $1.5 million estate, and experiencing the absolute pinnacle of luxury care at the hospital. I truly have the most amazing providing husband in the world. She paused, waiting for the polite applause and the appreciative murmurs from her wealthy friends. Bradley, who had just emerged from the outdoor patio, puffed out his chest and walked over to wrap an arm around Jasmine's waist. He beamed with arrogant pride, soaking in the admiration of the crowd. But Jasmine was not finished. She turned her body, slightly pointing her champagne flute directly at me, ensuring every single pair of eyes in the room followed her gesture. We are especially grateful today because we have a very unexpected guest. Jasmine continued, her tone shifting seamlessly from sweet gratitude to sickeningly condescending mockery. I am so glad my sister-in-law Nora could actually take a break from her lonely workaholic life to join us today. A few uncomfortable shifts rippled through the crowd. Jasmine ignored them, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I know how hard it must be sitting in a cold office all day entirely alone, just chasing money, while the rest of us are busy building actual families and creating real legacies. But it is so important for people like Nora to come to events like this. It gives her a chance to see what a real family looks like, what a real thriving marriage looks like in a home filled with actual love and success, rather than just empty corporate achievements. The silence in the room became incredibly heavy. Even her affluent friends looked taken aback by the sheer hostility of the public attack. You could hear a pin drop on the hardwood floor. But Jasmine thrived on the cruelty. She took a step closer to me, her fake smile widening into a predatory smirk. And since you caused such an unforgivable scene at the hospital and nearly ruined my entire delivery experience with your toxic energy, I assume you are standing there right now because you are finally ready to make amends. Jasmine held out her empty hand, palm up, right in front of my face. Did you bring the apology check, Nora, or did you just come here to drink our expensive champagne and stare at the life you will never have? Bradley stood next to her, crossing his arms and giving me a stern, expectant nod. He was silently commanding me to hand over the money and submit to his wife's public humiliation. He honestly believed I was trapped. He thought the immense social pressure of 50 affluent strangers staring at me would force me to quickly hand over the envelope just to make the nightmare stop. He thought I would crumble to protect my reputation. He had absolutely no idea that I spent my entire career tearing apart hostile corporate negotiators who were 10 times smarter and far more intimidating than a suburban housewife in a silk dress. I did not break eye contact with Jasmine. I did not blush, I did not stammer, and I did not look away in shame. Instead, I let a slow, genuinely amused smile spread across my face. I looked at her outstretched hand, then up to her arrogant, expectant eyes. I reached into my designer handbag, my fingers wrapping tightly around the thick ivory envelope. The entire room held its collective breath, waiting to see me surrender. But I was not reaching for a checkbook. I was reaching for the detonator. I pulled the thick ivory envelope from my bag and held it out. It was crafted from heavy premium cardstock, the kind usually reserved for high-end wedding invitations or corporate board summons. I did not thrust it at her angrily. I offered it to her with the steady, practiced grace of a diplomat, handing over a formal declaration of war. Jasmine snatched it from my fingers with a sharp, greedy motion. Her fake smile widened, stretching her lips over her teeth in a mask of pure, unadulterated triumph. She held the envelope up slightly, displaying it to her audience of affluent friends like a hunting trophy. She genuinely believed she had successfully bullied a corporate CEO into submission. In her mind, the hierarchy of the family had just been publicly reinforced. The wealthy, successful sister had bowed down to the chosen son and his perfect wife. Bradley puffed out his chest even further, taking a step closer to Jasmine. He wrapped his arm around her waist and beamed at the crowd. "See," he announced, his voice booming with arrogant satisfaction. "I told you she would come around. Family always figures it out. Thank you, Nora. We appreciate you finally stepping up and doing the right thing for your new nephew." I did not say you are welcome. I did not nod or acknowledge his pathetic attempt to play the gracious patriarch. I just stood perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in front of me, and waited for the show to begin. Jasmine slid her perfectly manicured fingernail under the flap of the envelope and broke the gold wax seal I had meticulously applied the night before. She reached inside, fully expecting to pull out a single slip of paper, a cashier's check written for $10,000. Instead, her fingers gripped a thick, folded stack of standard printer paper. The exact moment she pulled the documents out, the triumphant smirk on her face faltered. A wrinkle of deep confusion appeared between her perfectly arched eyebrows. She looked down at the pages, her eyes scanning the bold black text at the very top of the first sheet. I stood close enough to watch the exact second her brain tried to process the conflicting information. It was a beautiful, chaotic misfire. She saw the official logo for Mount Sinai Hospital. She saw the itemized list of premium charges, the private chef, the postpartum massage, the luxury corner suite with the panoramic city view. And at the very bottom, printed in bold red ink, she saw the final total: $30,300. But what she absolutely did not see was a check. She flipped to the second page, her movements growing slightly frantic, her custom silk dress rustling loudly in the deafening silence of the living room. She was desperately looking for the payment confirmation, but all she found was the financial guarantor agreement. "What is this?" Jasmine demanded, her voice instantly losing its polished performative edge. She looked up at me, genuine bewilderment replacing her previous hostility. "Why did you bring my hospital bill to my sip and see party? And why does it say the balance is completely unpaid? Bradley paid this before we even left the recovery wing." The affluent friends standing directly behind her began to exchange highly uncomfortable glances. The corporate attorney narrowed her dark eyes, instantly recognizing the distinct format of a medical collection notice. The flawless illusion of Jasmine's perfect debt-free life was beginning to crack right in front of the very people she was most desperate to impress. The tension in the room grew so thick it felt hard to breathe. I tilted my head slightly, my expression a perfect mask of polite, innocent confusion. "That is exactly what I was hoping you could explain to me, Jasmine," I said, making sure my tone was completely level, but loud enough to carry clearly to every single corner of the quiet room. "I received a very concerning phone call from the Mount Sinai billing department while I was sitting at the airport waiting for my flight back to the West Coast. They explicitly informed me that the insurance policy on file was completely invalid. Jasmine let out a sharp, breathless laugh, shaking her head as if I had just spoken a foreign language. Invalid. That is impossible. Bradley has premium family coverage through his logistics firm. We have the absolute best insurance you can buy. This has to be some sort of ridiculous administrative error. I did not break eye contact with her. My voice remained remarkably calm, slicing through her frantic denial with surgical precision. I thought it was an administrative error, too. I continued taking one slow, deliberate step closer to her. But then they sent me the complete digital file. And what I absolutely cannot figure out, Jasmine, is why the hospital is legally pursuing me for your $30,000 debt. I think there has been a massive mistake. Why is my full legal name, my home address, and my personal social security number listed as the primary financial guarantor on your VIP maternity suite bill? The collective gasp that rippled through the room was absolute poetry. 50 wealthy guests inhaled sharply at the exact same time. The word guarantor hung in the air like a physical weight. Jasmine's face drained of all its color, turning a sickly shade of pale gray. Her hands began to tremble so violently that the thick stack of hospital documents audibly rattled against each other. She slowly turned her head, her wide, horrified eyes locking onto her husband. She slowly turned her head, her wide, horrified eyes locking onto her husband. Bradley's polished, arrogant facade completely shattered. The smug smile he had been wearing just moments ago melted off his face, replaced by a mask of sheer panic. He looked at the papers trembling in Jasmine's hands, then looked at me. He realized instantly that I had not brought a check. I had brought the receipts. "Give me those," Bradley demanded, his voice cracking slightly. He lunged forward, reaching out with both hands to snatch the documents away from his wife. But I was faster. I stepped gracefully between them, extending my arm and pulling the documents smoothly out of Jasmine's grasp before Bradley could reach them. I held the thick stack of paper firmly against my chest, taking a strategic step backward to maintain my distance. "Do not touch these," I said, my voice ringing out with absolute authority. "These are official billing records containing my stolen personal information. They belong to me." "Nora, stop it right now," Bradley hissed, his face turning a deep, blotchy red. He darted his eyes around the room, painfully aware of the 50 silent guests watching his every move. "You are completely misunderstanding the situation. You are making a huge scene over a simple paperwork error. Hand them over before you embarrass yourself." "I am not the one who should be embarrassed, Bradley," I replied, projecting my voice so it carried clearly to the very back of the massive living room. "I want you to look your wife in the eye and explain this simple paperwork error, because from where I am standing it looks like a calculated federal crime." The room remained dead silent. You could hear the faint sound of the wind blowing against the large glass windows. "Bradley, did you really cancel your pregnant wife's health insurance to lease that Tesla in the driveway?" I asked, dropping the absolute heaviest truth right into the center of the party. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Jasmine staggered backward as if she had been physically struck. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth. "That is a lie," Bradley shouted, though his voice wavered with unmistakable guilt. "She is lying, Jasmine. She is just jealous of us. She faked those papers to ruin our day." "I did not fake anything," I countered smoothly, holding up the second page for the crowd to see. "6 months ago, you walked into your human resources department and voluntarily terminated your family health coverage to pocket the premium money. You needed exactly $1,200 a month to afford the lease on that shiny white SUV parked outside. You traded your wife's and your newborn son's medical safety for a status symbol." Jasmine let out a choked, devastated sob. She looked desperately at Bradley, waiting for him to confidently deny it, waiting for him to provide some logical explanation. But Bradley was sweating profusely. He could not look her in the eye. He stared at the floor, his jaw clenching and unclenching. And when it came time to pay the piper, I continued showing no mercy. You realized a VIP maternity suite was going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket. So instead of being a man and admitting you were broke, you decided to use me as your backup plan. Again. I stepped closer to him, forcing him to look up at me. Did you really forge my signature on an electronic admission pad, Bradley? Did you really recite my social security number to a billing registrar to cover a $30,000 invoice, fully expecting me to just quietly pay it to avoid a family scandal? The affluent guests surrounding us began to murmur loudly. The word fraud rippled through the crowd. Jasmine's friend, the corporate attorney, visibly took 2 large steps away from the center of the room, physically distancing herself from the unfolding legal disaster. She knew exactly what identity theft entailed. "Nora, shut your mouth!" Bradley yelled, stepping aggressively into my personal space. His fists were clenched at his sides. "You do not know what you are talking about. You have always tried to tear me down because you are miserable. Do you honestly think hospital security cameras and digital timestamps do not exist?" I asked, completely unfazed by his physical intimidation. "Do you think a multi-million-dollar healthcare facility just shrugs off forged guarantor documents? You committed identity theft. You committed medical fraud. You did it to impress people who are currently watching you unravel in your own living room." Jasmine finally found her voice. It was a fragile, broken whisper. "Bradley, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not cancel our insurance for a car." Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely trapped in the web of his own arrogant lies. The silence that followed was his absolute, undeniable confession. And just as the reality of his massive betrayal settled over the room, my parents finally pushed their way through the crowd, completely unaware that their golden boy had just been thoroughly destroyed. My mother, Susan, marched to the center of the living room with an indignant scowl on her face. She had heard the raised voices and immediately assumed, as she always did, that I was the instigator. She did not bother looking at the forged hospital documents in Jasmine's trembling hands. She did not notice Bradley sweating and staring at the floor like a cornered animal. All she saw was her precious son looking distressed, and me standing opposite him with my head held high. "Nora, keep your voice down right this instant." My mother snapped, her tone dripping with the familiar condescension she had used on me since childhood. "What on earth is wrong with you? We invited you here to celebrate your nephew, and you are throwing a temper tantrum in front of all these lovely guests. Apologize to your brother immediately and stop ruining this party." I did not back down. I turned my gaze from Bradley to my mother. "I am not throwing a tantrum, Mom. I am confronting a federal crime. Your son forged my signature and stole my social security number to stick me with a $30,000 hospital bill because he canceled his own wife's health insurance." Instead of being horrified by the revelation of Bradley's criminal behavior, my mother simply rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at identity theft. She stepped up beside Bradley, placing a fiercely protective hand on his arm. "So what?" she yelled, completely abandoning her own advice to keep the volume down. "He is your brother. He made a mistake because he was under immense pressure to provide a beautiful experience for Jasmine and the baby. You make 6 figures, Nora. You have more money than you know what to do with. Just pay the stupid bill and stop making such a huge deal out of nothing. Family helps family." My father, having recovered from our kitchen confrontation, stepped up to flank Bradley on the other side. "Your mother is exactly right," he boomed, trying to project absolute authority. "You are embarrassing yourself, Nora. Bradley is building a legacy here. He needed a little help. If you had just loaned him the $50,000 for the homeowner association fees when he asked months ago, he would not have been forced to cancel his insurance in the first place. This is entirely your fault for being so incredibly greedy." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of their logic hung in the air. They were actively blaming me for Bradley's decision to commit fraud, claiming my refusal to be their personal ATM forced him into a life of crime. But what my parents failed to realize was that we were not having this argument in the private confines of our childhood home. We were standing in front of 50 highly educated, self-made professionals who were now witnessing the absolute pinnacle of toxic family enabling. I watched as the expressions on the faces of Jasmine's affluent friends morphed from shock to absolute disgust. The corporate attorney crossed her arms, leaning over to whisper something to the luxury real estate broker standing next to her. The broker shook her head, looking at my parents with thinly veiled revulsion. These were women who worked incredibly hard to earn their wealth. They understood the severe gravity of identity theft. They understood the devastating financial implications of canceling health insurance for a pregnant woman. And they were listening to two grown adults coddle a 37-year-old man who had just stolen from his own sister to maintain a fake suburban lifestyle. Jasmine stood completely frozen, clutching the hospital papers to her chest. She looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally at Bradley, who was still hiding behind his parents like a scolded child. For the first time in her life, Jasmine was seeing the ugly, unfiltered reality of the family she had married into. The wealthy, successful husband she had been bragging about was a broke fraud. His supportive parents were nothing more than delusional enablers who encouraged his financial abuse. The perfect life she had curated for her social media followers was a complete and utter lie. The low hum of whispering spread through the crowd like wildfire. Guests were leaning into each other, exchanging appalled glances and pointing discreetly at Bradley. The luxurious sip and see party had officially transformed into a spectacular public unmasking. My mother looked around the room, finally noticing the hostile stares and the sneering whispers from the crowd. She puffed out her chest, trying to salvage the situation with more blind aggression. She glared at me, her face flushed with misplaced righteous anger. "You are a terrible sister, Nora. Pay the bill right now or get out of this house and never come back. You are a terrible sister, Nora. Pay the bill right now or get out of this house and never come back." I looked at my mother. I looked at the furious red face of the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was never quite good enough. For 33 years, that exact threat had controlled me. The fear of being kicked out of the family, the fear of being labeled the bad daughter had always forced me to swallow my pride and open my wallet. But standing there in the middle of that lavish living room surrounded by catered food and crystal champagne flutes, I realized the threat held absolutely no power over me anymore. The emotional manipulation that had governed my entire existence simply evaporated. I did not feel panicked. I did not feel the familiar sting of rejection. I just felt an overwhelming, powerful sense of relief. The toxic chains were finally broken. "I am not paying a single cent, Mom," I said, my voice steady, calm, and completely devoid of any emotion. "And I am certainly not apologizing for refusing to be the silent victim of a federal crime." Hearing my calm, flat refusal seemed to short-circuit whatever was left of Bradley's fragile ego. Up until this point, he had been cowering behind our parents, letting them fight his battles just like they always did. He had allowed his mother to shield him from the consequences of his own disastrous financial choices. But seeing me stand my ground, seeing his wife staring at him with absolute horror, and feeling the judging eyes of 50 wealthy guests boring into his back, something in him snapped. He needed to regain control of the narrative. He needed to prove to his affluent friends that he was the powerful patriarch he pretended to be. Bradley shoved his way past my mother and stepped directly into my personal space. His face was contorted with a desperate, ugly rage. He puffed out his chest and clenched his fists at his sides, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. The smell of expensive cologne and nervous sweat rolled off him in waves. "You heard her," Bradley shouted, his voice echoing harshly off the high vaulted ceilings of the living room. "Pay the damn bill or get the hell out." The sheer force of his voice made a few of the guests physically flinch. The acoustic guitarist, who had been awkwardly standing in the corner trying to blend into the wallpaper, quietly set his instrument down and slipped out the back sliding glass door. The hired catering staff froze in place, holding trays of expensive appetizers, terrified to make a sound. You are completely psychotic, Nora Bradley continued, his voice growing louder and more frantic with every single word. He pointed an aggressive finger right in my face, his hand shaking with rage. You came here today just to ruin this for us. You have always been jealous of me. You are jealous because I have a beautiful wife, a new son, and a perfect life. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see anyone else happy. He was projecting his own massive insecurities onto me, completely ignoring the fact that his perfect life was entirely funded by fraud and stolen money. He genuinely believed that if he yelled loud enough, if he acted aggressive enough, the crowd would somehow forget about the forged $30,000 medical bill and magically side with him. You think you are so much better than us because you have a fancy title and a big bank account, Bradley sneered, taking another step forward. He was forcing me to tilt my head back slightly to maintain eye contact, but I refused to back away. But you have nothing. You have no one. You are standing in the middle of my $1.5 million home trying to tear down my family because you are completely empty inside. You will never have what I have built. I did not step back. I did not blink. I let him yell. I let him dig the hole as deep as he possibly could. I want you out, Bradley roared, his face turning a dangerous blotchy shade of purple. He violently pointed his arm toward the heavy oak front door. Get the hell out of my house. You are jealous of us. Get off my property right now and never show your face near my family again. He stood there, chest heaving, breathing heavily through his nose. He looked around the room, expecting the crowd to nod in agreement, expecting Jasmine to rush to his side and comfort him. But nobody moved. The silence was absolute and suffocating. Jasmine remained frozen in place, her eyes darting between the thick stack of unpaid medical bills in her hands and the raving lunatic she had married. I slowly lowered my gaze from his furious eyes to his pointed finger, and then I looked around the massive, beautifully decorated living room. I looked at the custom hardwood floors, the marble fireplace, and the expensive imported furniture. He had given me the exact opening I needed. He had demanded I leave his property. He had anchored his entire fragile ego to the ownership of this house. The trap was fully set, and he had just willingly locked himself inside it. I let out a laugh. It did not start as a chuckle or a polite giggle. It was a genuine, cold, and deeply amused laugh that echoed loudly through the tense silence of the massive living room. The sound of my laughter was so entirely out of place in that high-stakes confrontation that it caused a physical reaction in the crowd. Several of Jasmine's affluent friends shifted uncomfortably, exchanging bewildered glances. My mother gasped, clutching her hand to her pearl necklace in exaggerated offense. My father crossed his arms, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. Bradley looked at me as if I had suddenly lost my mind. The aggressive posture he had taken a moment ago faltered slightly. His fists uncurled and a flicker of genuine confusion passed over his eyes. What is so funny? He demanded, his voice dropping from a roar to an uncertain snarl. What exactly is so hilarious to you right now? I took a slow, deep breath to steady myself, letting the last trace of my laughter fade into a sharp, predatory smile. Your property, I repeated, shaking my head in sheer disbelief at his arrogance. You just stood there, pointed at the front door, and told me to get off your property. That is a very interesting choice of words, Bradley. I took a step forward, completely erasing the physical distance he had tried to establish. Let us talk about this property for a moment, I said, raising my voice just enough to ensure the entire room hung on every single syllable. Let us rewind 3 years ago when you and Jasmine decided you simply had to have a $1.5 million custom estate in this exclusive gated community. Do you remember what happened when you applied for the mortgage? Bradley swallowed hard. His eyes darted nervously toward his wife, then toward his parents. Shut up, Nora, he warned, his voice low and threatening. This is a private family matter. Keep your mouth shut. Oh, it stopped being a private family matter the moment you stole my social security number and tried to make me pay for your wife's luxury hospital suite, I countered smoothly. You see, everyone standing here thinks you are a highly successful sales manager who bought this beautiful home to provide for his family. But the truth is, your credit was absolute garbage. No reputable bank in this state was willing to lend you $1 million. You could not afford this house. You never could. Jasmine turned her head slowly to look at her husband. Her eyes were wide, silently pleading with him to shut me down to prove that I was lying. But Bradley was paralyzed. Mom and Dad panicked. I continued gesturing vaguely toward my parents, who were now standing completely frozen. They begged me to co-sign the loan. They used every guilt trip in the book. And against my better judgment, I agreed to help you. But I was not stupid. I made sure my name was placed firmly on the property deed as a 50% equity owner. Legally, Bradley, I own half of the floor you are standing on. The guests began to murmur again. The luxury real estate broker in Jasmine's friend group nodded slowly, instantly, understanding the financial trap that had just been exposed. For 2 years you managed to make the payments, I said, keeping my gaze locked entirely on my brother. But then 6 months ago you decided you needed a brand new Tesla Model X, and since you had already canceled your wife's health insurance to afford the lease, you still needed to free up more cash to cover your massive credit card debts. So you made a very bold decision. You stopped paying the mortgage. Jasmine let out a sharp gasp. The thick stack of unpaid hospital bills slipped from her trembling fingers and scattered across the beautiful hardwood floor. She did not even try to pick them up. 1 month went by. 2 months. 3 months I listed, counting them off on my fingers. As the official co-signer on the loan, the bank naturally notified me of the severe delinquency. You completely defaulted on a $1.5 million loan. You ignored the bank's letters. You ignored their phone calls. You just kept driving your fancy car and hosting expensive parties, fully assuming that I would eventually panic and pay the arrears to protect my own pristine corporate credit score. I reached into my designer handbag once more. But I am not the frightened little sister you can bully anymore, I said, my voice turning into a weapon of absolute destruction. Your financial negligence directly threatened my assets. To protect myself, I engaged a legal loophole. Since you abandoned the loan, I negotiated a quiet buyout of my equity. I legally sold my entire share of this house to Vanguard Debt Solutions, a highly aggressive commercial collection agency. I severed my name from your toxic debt. You do not own this property anymore, Bradley, and neither do I. I severed my name from your toxic debt. You do not own this property anymore, Bradley, and neither do I. I reached back into the thick ivory envelope still resting in my hand. The crowd watched my every movement with breathless anticipation. They were completely mesmerized by the sheer magnitude of the financial destruction unfolding in front of them. I pulled out the second piece of paper. Unlike the hospital bill with its bold red lettering, this document was a stark, formal legal notice printed on heavy watermark paper. It was the official notice of default and foreclosure from Vanguard Debt Solutions. I held it up, making sure the official county clerk seal was clearly visible to everyone in the room, especially the real estate broker standing just a few feet away. This is a certified copy of the foreclosure filing, I announced, my voice ringing with cold, hard finality. Vanguard is not a standard bank, Bradley. They are a commercial liquidation firm. They do not offer payment plans. They do not care about your sob stories, and they certainly do not negotiate. They acquired the deed to this property specifically to liquidate it and recoup their investment. Bradley stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. His mouth opened and closed, but he was completely incapable of forming a coherent sentence. The arrogant, aggressive patriarch who had just ordered me off his property was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified man, realizing he had just lost absolutely everything. They are officially initiating the foreclosure process on Monday morning. I continued delivering the final fatal blow to his suburban illusion. A county sheriff will be arriving at this exact front door to serve the formal eviction notice. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. You do not own this house anymore. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room was suddenly violently broken. Jasmine, who had been standing frozen like a statue, completely lost her grip on reality. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the imported hardwood floor and shattered into 100 jagged pieces. The sharp crash echoed like a gunshot through the living room. Expensive champagne splashed across the expensive rug and splattered against the hem of her custom designer silk dress. Nobody moved to help her clean it up. Nobody even flinched. They just stared at the broken glass, a perfect physical representation of her entirely fractured life. Jasmine looked down at the shattered crystal, then slowly raised her eyes to look at her husband. The look of absolute horror and disgust on her face was something I will never forget. 30 days. Jasmine whispered, her voice cracking with pure panic. Bradley, what is she talking about? Tell me we are not losing our home. Tell me we are not getting evicted. Bradley swallowed hard, his face pale and slick with sweat. Jasmine, baby, listen to me, he stammered, holding his hands up in a desperate pleading gesture. It is a misunderstanding. I can fix this. I will call the bank on Monday. I will get a personal loan. We just need a little time to move some funds around. He was still lying. Even in the face of absolute documented destruction, he could not stop lying to her. You cannot fix this, I interjected, cutting off his pathetic excuses. The bank does not own the loan anymore. Vanguard owns it. And you cannot get a personal loan because your credit score is completely ruined. You traded your mortgage payments for a luxury car lease. And by the way, since you have no money to pay the hospital, how exactly are you going to keep making the payments on that Tesla? Jasmine let out a devastated, breathless sob. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her with full force. She was standing in a house she did not own. She was driving a car they were going to repossess. She was married to a man who had secretly canceled her health insurance right before she gave birth, leaving her with $30,000 in medical debt. Her entire life, the perfect image she had so carefully curated for her social media followers and her affluent friends, was nothing but a massive, humiliating lie. She turned her frantic gaze toward the crowd, looking desperately for any sign of support. She looked at the corporate attorney, the real estate broker, the tech executive she had been bragging to just moments ago, but she found absolutely no sympathy there. The women she had spent years trying to impress were looking at her with a mixture of pity and severe judgment. They were successful women who valued hard work and financial intelligence. They had absolutely no tolerance for people who faked their wealth and committed fraud to maintain a lifestyle they did not earn. Jasmine's hands flew up to cover her face as she let out another loud, gut-wrenching sob. She was completely broken. The lavish sip and sea party she had meticulously planned to showcase her superiority had become the exact stage for her ultimate downfall. Bradley reached out to touch her shoulder, trying to comfort her, but she violently slapped his hand away. "Do not touch me!" Jasmine screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet room. "Do not ever touch me again." I stood there watching the entire fake empire collapse into dust. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I had not destroyed their lives. I had simply handed them the bill for their own arrogant choices. I had simply handed them the bill for their own arrogant choices. Jasmine, trembling and humiliated, turned away from her husband. She desperately sought a lifeline in the room. She looked toward the cluster of affluent women she had spent years carefully cultivating. Her eyes locked onto her closest friend in the group, the highly successful corporate attorney. Jasmine stumbled forward, her designer heels clicking unsteadily on the imported floor. She reached out a trembling hand, silently pleading for someone, anyone, to validate her, to tell her that this was just a horrible nightmare. "Denise, tell them," Jasmine begged, her voice high, thin, and panicked. "Tell them this is not legal. Tell her she cannot just sell our house out from under us. Tell her Bradley made a mistake and we can just pay a fine. Please, you are a lawyer. Help us fix this. Tell me what to do." Denise did not step forward to comfort her distressed friend. Instead, the attorney took two very deliberate steps backward. She looked down at the shattered crystal champagne glass near Jasmine's feet and then she looked at the thick stack of official hospital documents scattered across the rug. When Denise finally made eye contact with Jasmine, her expression was completely devoid of sympathy. It was the cold, calculating look of a professional assessing a massive liability. Jasmine Denise said, her voice painfully clear and loud enough for every remaining guest to hear. "I cannot help you, and I strongly advise you to stop talking right now." Jasmine blinked rapidly, tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. "What do you mean? You are my friend. You have to help me fight this. I am a corporate attorney," Denise corrected her, her tone icy and completely detached. "And as an officer of the court, I am telling you that what your husband just did is not a simple mistake. Medical fraud and identity theft are federal felonies. Forging a social security number on a hospital admission document is a severe criminal offense. It carries mandatory prison time and massive financial penalties." Jasmine gasped loudly, both hands flying to her chest. Bradley turned a sickly shade of gray. He opened his mouth to argue, but Denise cut him off with a sharp, warning glare. "Do not say a single word to me, Bradley," Denise snapped. "I cannot be associated with this. My law firm represents major healthcare networks in this state. If anyone finds out I was attending a party hosted by someone actively committing insurance fraud, it could jeopardize my entire career. My bar license is not worth your fake lifestyle." Denise turned to the luxury real estate broker standing directly next to her. The broker was already pulling her designer coat off the back of a nearby dining chair, her face twisted in disgust. "And for the record," the real estate broker added, looking at Jasmine with absolute disdain, "Nora is entirely correct about Vanguard Debt Solutions. They are notorious in the commercial liquidation sector. If they filed a notice of default, this house is already gone. You have been throwing extravagant parties to impress us while living in a foreclosed property. It is completely pathetic." The brutal honesty from the women Jasmine admired most was the final nail in the coffin. The illusion was dead. The wealthy, successful friends Jasmine had used to elevate her social status were now looking at her like she was a criminal. The mass exodus began instantly. Denise turned on her heel and walked purposefully toward the front door. The real estate broker followed right behind her. It was as if a silent alarm had been triggered. The remaining guests all began moving in a unified wave toward the exit. Nobody bothered to say goodbye. Nobody offered a sympathetic hug. They were fleeing a sinking ship. They whispered to each other as they grabbed their coats from the hired attendant. The story of Bradley and Jasmine's spectacular downfall would be the talk of their exclusive suburban community by nightfall. Their social execution was absolute. My mother and father stood helplessly in the middle of the emptying room. My mother reached out, trying to stop one of Jasmine's friends from leaving, but the woman simply brushed her hand away. My parents were finally realizing that their unwavering support for Bradley's delusions had just made them social pariahs as well. Within 5 minutes, the massive house was virtually empty. The hired waitstaff had discreetly retreated to the kitchen. The only people left in the sprawling living room were my parents, my brother, his devastated wife, and me. Jasmine sank to her knees right in the middle of the floor. She stared blankly at the scattered hospital bills, completely shattered by the absolute loss of her friends, her home, and her dignity. Bradley stood frozen, watching the last of his affluent guests walk out the door, taking his entire fake legacy with them. He had sacrificed everything to impress them, and they had abandoned him in an instant. He had sacrificed everything to impress them, and they had abandoned him in an instant. The sound of the heavy oak front door clicking shut behind the last departing guest seemed to break the spell that held Bradley in place. The reality of his complete social and financial destruction finally penetrated his thick skull. But instead of remorse or accountability, his reaction was pure, unfiltered rage. His face twisted into an ugly, desperate sneer. He took a sudden, aggressive step toward me, his hands curling into tight fists. "You are a liar!" Bradley screamed, the sound tearing through the sudden quiet of the empty living room. He lunged forward, his chest heaving, spittle flying from his lips. "You made all of this up. You printed those fake papers to ruin my life because you are a miserable, lonely woman." I am going to sue you for slander. I am going to take every single dime you have for destroying my family." My father instinctively stepped between us, putting a hand on Bradley's chest to hold him back. But even my father looked shaken, his eyes darting nervously between my brother's frantic face and my completely calm demeanor. I did not flinch when Bradley lunged. I did not step back. I simply stood there and watched a grown man throw a temper tantrum because his criminal actions had finally caught up with him. I slowly lifted my left wrist and deliberately checked my watch. It was a precise, calculated movement that showed absolutely zero fear. "I am not lying, Bradley," I said, my voice cutting through his hysterical screaming like a freshly sharpened blade. "And neither is the official police report I filed for felony identity theft, exactly 48 hours ago." The words hit him like a physical blow. He stopped struggling against our father's grip. The color completely drained from his face for the second time that afternoon, leaving him looking like a ghost. He opened his mouth, but only a raspy choking sound came out. My mother, who had been standing in paralyzed shock, suddenly sprang to life. "A police report," she shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. "Nora, what have you done? You called the police on your own brother. You need to call them back right now and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave him permission to use your information. We can figure the money out. You cannot send your brother to jail." She was still doing it. Even now, with the absolute proof of his crimes scattered on the floor, she was demanding that I perjure myself to save him. "I cannot withdraw the report, Mom," I explained, keeping my tone coldly educational. Identity theft across state lines involving a major medical facility is not a simple misdemeanor. It is a federal matter. Once the hospital fraud department and the local authorities were notified, the investigation was entirely out of my hands. I provided them with the forged documents, the digital timestamps from the hospital admission pad, and his employer's insurance cancellation records. The evidence is overwhelming. Jasmine, still kneeling on the floor, let out a low, agonizing wail. She pressed the palms of her hands against her eyes, rocking back and forth. Prison. Her husband was going to federal prison. The realization was destroying her in real time. "Nora, please," my father begged, his voice cracking. His authoritative patriarch persona had completely vanished, replaced by the terrified plea of a desperate old man. He took a step toward me, holding his hands up in surrender. "We will pay you back. We will sell our retirement assets. We will give you the $30,000. Just tell the authorities it was a misunderstanding. Please do not ruin his life. He ruined his own life, Dad," I replied, my voice hard and unforgiving. "He stole from me. He lied to his pregnant wife. He defaulted on $1 million loan. I am not his safety net anymore. And I am certainly not going to commit a crime to cover up his." Bradley shook his head violently, his eyes wide with sheer panic. "No, no, no," he muttered, stumbling backward until his back hit the marble kitchen island. "They are not coming. You are bluffing. You would not do this to me. You are just trying to scare me." I did not have to answer him. The universe answered for me. At first, it was just a faint, high-pitched wail echoing in the distance. But within seconds, the sound grew louder, multiplying into a chorus of approaching sirens. The wailing tore through the quiet suburban neighborhood, growing deafeningly close. Suddenly, the manicured front lawn and the massive living room walls were illuminated by intense strobing flashes of red and blue light. The police had arrived. The strobing colors reflected off the shattered champagne glass on the floor, casting eerie, dancing shadows across my mother's terrified face. The heavy reality of the situation crashed down on all of them. There was no escaping this. The reckoning was finally here. There was no escaping this. The reckoning was finally here. The heavy, authoritative pounding on the solid oak front door echoed through the silent house. It was not a polite knock. It was the sound of the law demanding immediate entry. "Police department," a stern voice shouted from the other side of the heavy wood. "Open the door." Bradley stood completely paralyzed, his back pressed against the marble kitchen island, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. He looked like a trapped animal who had finally run out of places to hide. My father, clinging to his last remaining shred of patriarchal authority, cleared his throat, adjusted his shirt collar, and walked unsteadily toward the foyer to answer the door. When my father pulled the heavy oak door open, the intense flashing red and blue lights flooded the grand entryway. Two uniformed police officers and one plainclothes detective stepped over the threshold. Their expressions were stone cold and entirely professional. Because the door was left wide open, the scene outside became painfully visible. Jasmine's affluent friends, the ones who had just fled the house moments ago, had not made it very far. They were standing by their luxury cars parked along the circular driveway, their eyes wide as they watched the police raid the $1.5 million estate. Neighbors from across the manicured lawns had stepped out onto their porches, drawn by the wailing sirens. The pristine, wealthy suburban neighborhood was now the captive audience for a massive, humiliating spectacle. "Are you Bradley?" the detective asked, bypassing my father completely and locking his eyes directly on my brother. Bradley swallowed hard, nodding faintly. The detective pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. "Bradley, I have a warrant for your arrest issued by the state authorities in cooperation with the Federal Fraud Division. You are being charged with felony identity theft, wire fraud, and medical fraud. Please step away from the counter and place your hands behind your back." Bradley shook his head wildly. "No, wait," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "You do not understand. This is a family dispute. My sister is right there." "Nora, tell them. Tell them we are working it out." He looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, begging me to save him from the consequences of his own actions. I did not say a word. I simply looked at the detective and gave a slow, confirming nod. "I am the victim who filed the report," I stated clearly. "He forged my signature and stole my social security number to defraud Mount Sinai Hospital." The detective gestured to the uniformed officers. They moved forward swiftly, grabbing Bradley by the arms and spinning him around. The metallic, heavy click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed sharply in the massive living room. It was the sound of his entire fake empire collapsing. "You have the right to remain silent." The officer began, reciting, his voice drowning out my mother's sudden hysterical sobbing. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Jasmine, who was still kneeling on the floor amidst the shattered champagne glass and the scattered hospital bills, let out a blood-curdling scream. It was not a scream of sorrow. It was a scream of pure, unfiltered humiliation. She scrambled to her feet, her expensive silk dress stained and ruined. "No!" she shrieked, her voice tearing through the air. "You cannot do this. People are watching. The neighbors are outside. You are ruining my life." She pointed a shaking finger at Bradley as the officers began marching him toward the front door. "You liar! You absolute fraud! You told me we were rich. You told me you paid for everything. You humiliated me in front of everyone." My mother rushed forward, trying to physically block the officers from taking her precious son. "You cannot take him," she cried, grabbing at the detective's sleeve. "He just had a baby. He is a good man." The detective firmly removed her hand. "Ma'am, step back right now or you will be arrested for interfering with an active investigation." My father quickly grabbed my mother's shoulders and pulled her away, his face buried in his hands. He was entirely defeated. The officers marched Bradley out the front door, down the paver stone pathway, and straight toward the waiting patrol car. Every step he took was a public execution of his carefully crafted persona. The flashing lights illuminated his tear-stained, panicked face for the entire neighborhood to see. Jasmine's former friends, the affluent women she had desperately tried to impress, stood by their luxury cars. They were not offering support. They were pulling out their smartphones. I could clearly see the glow of their screens as they began recording the perp walk. The perfect, highly curated social media life Jasmine had sacrificed everything to build was instantly destroyed, replaced by the harsh, viral reality of her husband being shoved into the back of a police cruiser in steel handcuffs. Jasmine ran out onto the front porch screaming at her former friends to stop recording, but her voice was entirely drowned out by the roar of the police engine. I stood calmly in the grand foyer, watching the red and blue lights fade down the street completely at peace. I stood calmly in the grand foyer, watching the red and blue lights fade down the street completely at peace. The heavy silence that followed the wailing sirens was broken only by the sound of my mother weeping. She had collapsed onto the bottom step of the grand curved staircase, her face buried in her hands. My father stood over her, his shoulders slumped, staring blankly out the open doorway. The reality of what had just happened was too massive for their minds to process. Their golden boy, the son they had sacrificed my entire childhood to prop up, was currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. My father slowly turned his gaze away from the empty driveway and looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. He took a hesitant step forward, holding his hands up in a gesture of absolute defeat. "Nora," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Please, you have made your point. You showed everyone the truth. But you have to fix this now. You have to call the police station. Tell them you gave him permission to use your social security number. Tell them you will pay the $30,000 hospital bill. We will sell our house if we have to, but you cannot let him go to federal prison. You are a smart businesswoman, Nora. You know how to negotiate. You can make this entire situation go away if you just use your corporate connections. He is your own flesh and blood. You cannot just stand there and let a simple financial misunderstanding destroy his future. He has a newborn son to think about." My mother lifted her tear-streaked face from her hands. "Yes," she sobbed, pushing herself up from the stairs. She stumbled toward me, reaching out to grab my arm. "You are his sister. Family is all we have. He made a terrible mistake because he wanted to give Jasmine the perfect life. He was just trying to be a good husband. You have the power to stop this nightmare. Just call your lawyer, call the hospital. You have so much money, Nora. This is just a drop in the bucket for you, but it will ruin his life forever. We are begging you." I looked down at my mother's hand resting on my sleeve. I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no obligation. For 33 years they had demanded that I shrink myself to make room for his ego. They had stolen my college fund, drained my resources, and allowed him to treat me like garbage, all while demanding my unwavering loyalty. And even now, standing in the ruins of a foreclosed home, watching their daughter-in-law completely broken on the floor, their only instinct was to sacrifice me to save him. They did not care about the severe legal ramifications I would face by lying to federal investigators. They did not care about my career, my reputation, or my emotional well-being. Their entire universe revolved around protecting Bradley. It was a deeply toxic cycle, and I was finally stepping out of it forever. I slowly reached down and removed my mother's hand from my arm. "I am not calling my lawyer, Mom," I said, my voice completely steady and devoid of any warmth. "I am not calling the police station, and I am certainly not paying a $30,000 hospital bill for a man who committed a federal crime to steal from me. He was not trying to be a good husband. He was trying to be a rich man, using my identity." My father tried to speak, but I cut him off. "You enabled this, Dad," I told him, looking him dead in the eye. "Both of you did. Every time he failed, you bailed him out and handed the bill to me. You taught him that he could do whatever he wanted, take whatever he wanted, and there would never be any consequences. Well, the consequences just drove away in a patrol car. You chose him every time," I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent foyer. "When he needed money, you chose him. When he insulted me, you chose him. When he literally committed fraud against me, you chose him. So now you can choose to bail him out. You can choose to hire his criminal defense attorney. You can choose to sell your retirement assets to pay for his mistakes. But you will do it without me. Do not ever contact me again." I turned my back on them. I did not wait to hear my mother scream my name. I did not look back at Jasmine, who was still sitting on the floor weeping over the shattered glass. I walked out the heavy oak front door, down the paver stone pathway, and out into the cool evening air. The affluent neighbors were still standing on their porches whispering to each other, but I did not care. I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove out of the exclusive gated community. I left them entirely behind in the wreckage they had built themselves, finally and completely free. I left them entirely behind in the wreckage they had built themselves, finally and completely free. Exactly 2 weeks passed since that explosive Saturday afternoon in the suburbs. The transition from that chaotic environment back to my own life felt like stepping out of a suffocating, smoke-filled room and taking a deep breath of crisp, clean air. I was sitting at the marble kitchen island of my penthouse apartment enjoying a quiet Saturday morning. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sweeping views of the downtown skyline and the calm waters of the bay. My phone had not buzzed with a single guilt trip or frantic demand. I had immediately blocked my parents, my brother, and his wife on every conceivable platform the moment my flight landed back on the West Coast. The absolute silence from my toxic family was the greatest luxury I had ever experienced. My peaceful morning routine was pleasantly interrupted by the soft chime of my private elevator. My building concierge had sent up a certified courier. I signed for a thick manila envelope sent directly from my personal attorney. I took the envelope back to my kitchen island, poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, and broke the seal. I expected it to be routine updates regarding the identity theft case, but my lawyer had included a comprehensive summary of the immediate fallout. He knew I would want to see the exact blast radius of the bomb I had dropped. I spread the documents out across the cool marble counter and started reading. The first document was a public record filing from the county family court. Jasmine had wasted absolutely no time. Less than 72 hours after Bradley was marched out of his house in handcuffs, she officially filed for divorce. The petition was absolutely brutal. She was not just asking for full custody of their newborn son. She was aggressively suing Bradley for financial fraud, emotional distress, and the complete destruction of her personal credit. According to the filing, Jasmine claimed she had no prior knowledge of the canceled health insurance and was demanding that the court hold Bradley solely responsible for the $30,000 hospital debt. Her highly curated social media accounts had been completely deleted. She had packed up her designer clothes and moved into her sister's cramped guest bedroom, completely abandoning the sinking ship. The second set of documents contained updates from Vanguard Debt Solutions. They had executed their timeline flawlessly. The Monday following the sip and see party, county sheriffs arrived at the property and posted a massive, highly visible eviction notice right on the heavy oak front door. Because Vanguard was a commercial liquidation firm, they aggressively pursued the vacancy. Bradley, who was currently out on bail, had been forced to hastily pack his belongings into cheap cardboard boxes while his affluent neighbors watched from their perfectly manicured lawns. The $1.5 million estate was now completely empty. Its locks changed and a bright red bank-owned sign was planted firmly in the front yard. But the most satisfying detail of the financial collapse was a small note regarding the driveway. On the exact same day the eviction notice was served, the dealership leasing company sent a tow truck to reclaim the Tesla Model X. Bradley had missed 2 consecutive lease payments. His golden child status symbol, the luxury vehicle he had literally traded his family's health insurance to keep, was unceremoniously hooked up to a winch and dragged away in broad daylight. Finally, I read the legal summary regarding Bradley's criminal charges. This was not a television drama where a stern warning makes everything go away. The federal prosecutors were treating his case with maximum severity. Medical fraud combined with interstate identity theft carried mandatory sentencing guidelines. Bradley was facing real substantial prison time. His mediocre corporate logistics career was permanently over. He had been fired the moment the arrest became public news. My attorney noted that my parents had officially hired a high-powered criminal defense lawyer for him, confirming my exact prediction. To afford the exorbitant retainer fee, Richard and Susan had put their own suburban home on the market and completely liquidated their retirement portfolios. They were willingly destroying their own financial security to fight a losing battle for a son who had never truly respected them. They had chosen him over me just as they always did, and now they were paying the ultimate price for their blind enabling. I neatly stacked the legal documents, placed them back inside the manila envelope, and took a long, slow sip of my coffee. I looked out over the sparkling water of the bay, feeling an immense, profound sense of validation. The universe had finally balanced the scales. The universe had finally balanced the scales. 3 months later, the stark contrast between the ashes of their lives and the soaring trajectory of mine was undeniable. I was standing at the head of a massive mahogany conference table in the executive boardroom of my firm. The room was bathed in the bright morning light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked the bustling financial district. Seated around the table were 15 of the most powerful executives in the regional healthcare sector. We were finalizing the acquisition of a rival brokerage, a massive deal that would effectively double the market share of my company. I confidently projected the final, meticulously calculated financial projections onto the massive digital screen behind me. The numbers were absolutely flawless, a perfect reflection of months of intense dedication. I walked them through the complex integration strategy, my voice calm, authoritative, and completely unshakable. When I finished the presentation, the room did not erupt into the forced, polite applause that Jasmine had begged for at her pathetic suburban party. Instead, there was a moment of heavy, respectful silence as the board members digested the sheer magnitude of the projected profits. Then the chief financial officer of the acquired firm leaned forward, a look of genuine admiration on his face. He nodded slowly and simply stated that they were incredibly fortunate to be under my strategic leadership. It was a profound moment of professional triumph. I had built this empire from scratch. I had earned every single ounce of respect in that room through relentless hard work, late nights, and an uncompromising dedication to excellence. There were no handouts in my world. There were no stolen funds, hidden debts, or forged signatures padding my success. Everything I had I truly owned, and no one could ever take it away from me. As I shook hands with the board members and officially closed the meeting, my mind briefly wandered to the chaotic reality my family was currently enduring. The contrast was almost cinematic in its justice. While I was successfully negotiating a $20 million corporate merger, Bradley was likely sitting in a sterile, depressing public defender's office. He was desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal to avoid a maximum security federal prison sentence. He had lost absolutely everything: the luxury cars, the massive suburban estate, and the wealthy friends were all completely gone. His daily reality was now defined by endless court dates, mounting legal fees, and the terrifying prospect of losing his freedom. Jasmine was faring no better. The divorce proceedings she initiated had turned incredibly vicious. The carefully curated social media influencer was now working as a receptionist at a local dental clinic just to afford diapers. She was living out of a cramped guest bedroom in her sister's small apartment. The affluent African-American women she had spent years trying to impress had entirely blacklisted her from their social circles. She was completely isolated, forced to face the harsh reality of the fake life she had so aggressively defended. And my parents, the ultimate enablers, were experiencing their own devastating downfall. Their beautiful home, the house I grew up in, was currently sitting on the market with a massive price reduction. They were bleeding cash, rapidly, frantically liquidating their retirement accounts and selling off their valuable assets just to keep Bradley's criminal defense attorneys paid. They had willingly destroyed their own golden years to protect a son who had never given them a single thing in return. I walked out of the boardroom and headed down the quiet, carpeted hallway toward my corner office. My assistant Megan fell into step beside me, handing me a thick stack of congratulatory messages from our top clients. She was beaming with genuine pride, thrilled for the massive success of our company. I thanked her, took the messages, and stepped into my private office, closing the heavy glass door firmly behind me. I walked over to the massive window and looked down at the city streets far below. For the first time in my 33 years of life, I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for my success. I did not feel the lingering need to hide my accomplishments or shrink myself to make Bradley feel bigger. The incredible amount of emotional energy I used to waste trying to earn my parents' conditional love was now entirely channeled into my own growth. I was thriving. I was completely unbothered by their spectacular collapse because I knew it was entirely self-inflicted. They had built a fragile house of cards out of lies and arrogance, and they had demanded that I be the foundation. When I finally walked away, the entire structure collapsed under its own weight. I sat down at my large desk, opened my laptop, and went back to work, feeling an absolute, unshakable sense of peace. My life was finally my own, and it was undeniably beautiful. My life was finally my own, and it was undeniably beautiful. 6 months slipped by with the quiet grace of a life completely unburdened. Spring turned into a crisp, vibrant autumn. My brokerage continued its aggressive expansion, and my days were filled with high-stakes negotiations, corporate strategy meetings, and the deep satisfying exhaustion of building an empire on my own terms. I had not spoken a single word to my parents, my brother, or his ex-wife since that explosive Saturday in the suburbs. I had aggressively blocked every phone number, email address, and social media account associated with them. The silence was my sanctuary. But desperate people always find a way to slip through the cracks. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my living room reviewing a massive portfolio merger on my tablet with a glass of expensive red wine resting on the side table. My phone buzzed with a notification from my carrier. It was an alert indicating that a new voicemail had been deposited into my blocked caller folder. Normally, I would just hit delete without a second thought. But curiosity, or perhaps a lingering desire to hear the final echo of their collapse, made me tap the play button. The audio clicked, and a voice filled the quiet space of my living room. It was my mother, Susan, but she did not sound like the arrogant, demanding matriarch who had ordered me to pay a $30,000 hospital bill. Her voice was thin, raspy, and completely broken. She was crying. Not the theatrical, manipulative tears she used to control my father, but the deep, ragged sobs of a woman who had finally hit absolute rock bottom. Nora, please do not delete this. My mother begged, her breath hitching painfully into the receiver. I know you blocked us. I had to buy a prepaid phone just to leave this message. Please just listen to me for 1 minute. I do not know what else to do. We have lost everything. I sat back against my leather sofa, taking a slow sip of my wine, and let her talk. The high-powered criminal defense attorney we hired for Bradley drained us completely. She confessed, her voice shaking with raw despair. We had to sell the house. We sold it at a massive loss because we were so desperate for the cash to pay his legal retainers. Your father and I are renting a tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. All of our retirement savings are gone. Every single penny we saved for the last 40 years was liquidated to keep your brother out of a maximum security federal prison. She paused to blow her nose, the sound echoing harshly through the phone speaker. The legal strategy did not even work. Bradley was forced to take a terrible plea deal. He is serving 18 months in a minimum security facility, and when he gets out, he owes the hospital and the federal government hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution. He is ruined, Nora. His career is gone. His life is over. My expression remained entirely neutral. I felt no pity. They had chosen this path when they decided to fund his delusions with my stolen identity. And Jasmine has completely abandoned us. My mother continued, the bitterness suddenly cutting through her tears. She finalized the divorce. She is living in a cramped, miserable little studio apartment with the baby. She works night shifts at a call center and refuses to let us see our own grandson unless we give her money. But we do not have any money left to give her. We are drowning. Your father had to take a job as a greeter at a hardware store just so we can afford groceries. His health is failing from the stress. Then came the pivot, the inevitable, predictable reason for the prepaid phone and the desperate tears. The exact same cycle of financial abuse wrapped in a pathetic new package. Nora, you are our only hope, my mother cried, her voice rising in frantic desperation. I see the news articles about your company. I know about the massive merger you just closed. You have so much wealth now. Please, I am begging you as your mother. We need a loan, just enough to help us get back on our feet to help pay off Bradley's restitution so he has a chance when he gets out. You can save this family. If you ever loved us, please call me back. We are so sorry for everything. Please, Nora. Please. The voicemail ended with a sharp click, leaving my apartment in absolute silence once again. I stared at the screen of my phone. The message was exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds long. It contained a comprehensive summary of their total destruction, a weak, generalized apology, and a massive demand for my money. They still did not understand. Even after losing their home, their retirement, and their social standing, they still viewed me as nothing more than a bank vault, waiting to be cracked open. My mother was not sorry for how they had treated me. She was only sorry that the ATM had finally closed its doors. She wanted me to swoop in and rescue the very people who had watched me being pushed out of a hospital room, the very people who had called me greedy for refusing to be extorted. I set my wine glass down on the marble coaster. The rain lashed against the massive windows of my penthouse, a chaotic storm outside that perfectly mirrored the wreckage of my family, while I remained completely warm and secure inside the fortress I had built with my own two hands. I felt a profound sense of closure washing over me. The desperate plea for a loan was the final confirmation I needed. The desperate plea for a loan was the final confirmation I needed. I did not respond that night. Instead, I went to sleep in my quiet, secure home and woke up the next morning feeling more refreshed than I had in years. I drove to my corporate headquarters and stepped into my corner office. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, holding my phone in my hand, and looked out over the sprawling city skyline. The morning sun was reflecting off the glass towers, painting the world in bright, optimistic gold. I decided to play the voicemail one more time. I wanted to hear it in the cold, clear light of day, surrounded by the physical manifestation of the empire I had built with my own two hands. Listening to my mother sob through the speaker of my phone, detailing the complete destruction of their lives, I braced myself for the familiar wave of suffocating guilt. I waited for the deeply ingrained childhood conditioning to kick in, the voice that always told me I was responsible for fixing my brother's massive failures. But that voice was completely gone. It never came. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of freedom. The heavy, rusty chains of familial obligation had finally snapped. The desperate need for their conditional validation had completely evaporated. They were essentially strangers to me now. They were just strangers who had made terrible, arrogant choices and were finally experiencing the natural consequences of their own actions. I did not draft a long, emotionally charged text message explaining why I was saying no. I did not call my attorney to see if there was a safe, legally protected way to send money for my nephew. I simply looked at the screen, took a deep, cleansing breath, and tapped my finger. Delete. The audio vanished instantly. Then I went into my phone settings, permanently blocked the new prepaid number, and set the device face down on my polished mahogany desk. It was officially over. The absolute greatest victory was not exposing Bradley in front of his affluent friends at the party. It was not watching the police march him out of his foreclosed home in steel handcuffs. The greatest victory was simply walking away completely unbothered and never looking back. I want you to remember this if you are listening to my story right now. Family is not defined by shared biology or a common last name. Family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine unconditional love. If the people who are supposed to protect you are the very ones constantly tearing you down, you do not owe them your loyalty. If they only acknowledge your value when they need something from your bank account, they do not deserve a seat at your table. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. For years, I genuinely believed that if I just worked a little harder, if I just gave them a little more money, if I just shrank my own ambitions to make my brother look bigger, they would eventually love me. But toxic enablers do not want your love. They want your complete compliance. They want you to stay small and submissive so they never have to face the ugly reality of their own failures. Do not let anyone convince you that protecting your peace makes you a selfish person. Setting ironclad boundaries is the ultimate act of self-care. Financial independence is the greatest shield you will ever forge. When I finally stopped pouring my energy into a black hole that treated me like an endless resource, my entire life transformed. I took all of that wasted effort and invested it directly into myself. I built a massive corporate firm. I surrounded myself with incredible people who celebrate my victories instead of envying them. I created a life that is so incredibly full, successful, and beautiful that there is simply no room left for their toxic drama. You have the power to do the exact same thing. If you are stuck in a vicious cycle of emotional manipulation or financial abuse with your own family, let my story be your sign to finally cut the cord. Stop waiting for sincere apologies that will never come. Stop trying to prove your incredible worth to people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. Take all of that beautiful, resilient energy and use it to build your own empire. Build a life where you make the rules. Build a sanctuary where your peace is fiercely protected. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to save yourself? How did your life change when you finally set those hard boundaries? I would love to read your stories in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories about resilience, strength, and taking back your power. Share this video with someone who might need the courage to finally walk away. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, your worth is not determined by how much you can give to people who do not appreciate you. Your worth is inherent, and your future is entirely in your hands. Now go build your empire. The story of Nora powerfully illustrates a lesson that many people struggle to accept. Setting absolute boundaries with toxic family members is not an act of selfishness, but a necessary measure of self-preservation. For years, Nora was conditioned to believe that her value to her family was directly tied to her financial compliance. Her parents and brother weaponized the concept of family to extort her resources, demanding that she constantly shrink her own life to accommodate their reckless choices and fragile egos. Society often feeds us the narrative that blood is thicker than water, and that we must unconditionally forgive our relatives no matter how deeply they betray us. However, Nora's journey reveals the dangerous flaw in this mindset. When family loyalty is entirely one-sided, it completely ceases to be love and quickly becomes unapologetic exploitation. By walking away and refusing to cover up her brother's federal crimes, Nora broke a generational cycle of enabling. She realized that she could not cure their dysfunction by simply writing another check or absorbing another public humiliation. The profound, lasting peace that Nora finally found at the end of her story was not derived from seeking revenge, but from reclaiming her independence. She learned that true empowerment comes from recognizing your own inherent worth and refusing to let it be diminished by those who refuse to grow. Letting go of the people who repeatedly drain your emotional and financial reserves allows you to redirect that energy into building a life of authentic success and genuine connections. You absolutely do not owe your bright future to people who only show respect when you are paying their endless bills. If you are currently sacrificing your own well-being to keep toxic relationships afloat, take the first step today and choose to fiercely protect your own peace.